Radio, it's the sound of the nation. And I was on the radio, on the Sound of the Nation, on Radio 5 Live, on Monday. So this is a little video of, well, you're going to hear what I was talking about in a minute, but I just thought I'd just mention a few things about the interview, perhaps, and about me doing radio. If you followed me for a while, you know that I get asked every now and then to do a little bit of stuff on Radio 5, Radio 4, Radio Gloucester, Radio Bristol, and I do also pop up occasionally on a bit of Sky or Points West, and very occasionally national stuff on BBC or something. This radio interview came about because I did the Sky interview about a month ago talking about inheritance tax, and someone of the researchers for Nicky Campbell's show saw that and thought he can chat about the budget or about the inheritance tax issue in farming. So that's what I was approached to do probably a couple of weeks ago. And it's quite interesting. You never actually speak to the presenters until the moment you're on the radio. You always deal with either a researcher or a producer who contacts you, makes the initial contact, has a chat with you, usually for quite a long time, to find out what you're talking about and everything like that. And then you get sort of left, and then suddenly you get that phone call, and you sit there with your phone and you actually listen to the broadcast going on, but you're not actually part of it until the presenter in the studio presses that button and you're part of the chat. So the bit you're going to listen to is just the bit that I was talking about, but it was part of a wider chat about the budget and stuff. But what was quite interesting is they approached me a while ago and said, "Oh, would you like to come on and talk about the farming inheritance tax?" And I said yes. And I was thinking, well, I don't know quite what the programme's about. Anyway, by the time I came to do it on Monday, the programme was about the budget. And the woman, the researcher, I don't know the lady's name, the researcher for Nicky Campbell said to me, "We're not quite sure how you're going to fit you into this. So what we'd like you to do is sort of angle it that you're talking about what you're hoping will be in the budget," which I kind of didn't really know what I was going to go on there for. And I thought, well, obviously I'm going to talk about inheritance tax, but I wasn't thinking that the chance is going to change her mind about inheritance tax. So it was a little bit, I went on there not really thinking of it. I had to sort of say, oh, I hope they change the budget for inheritance tax. But I was thinking, that ain't going to happen. And I wasn't really planning to do that sort of talk. The other thing as well, when Nicky Campbell sort of let me speak, he let me go on for ages. And I've done quite a lot of radio now, and I kind of expected to sort of be interrupted quite quickly, because normally a presenter normally comes in with a question and stuff. So if you listen to the first bit of it, you hear me talking for quite a while. All the time I'm talking, actually on the phone, I was thinking, when's he going to come in with a question? When's he going to come in with a question? And I'm kind of filling the air with my voice, thinking, where's this going? Where's this going? But it was fine. It came in with the questions later on, and then towards the end there was the problem. Very difficult with live stuff like that is that you can't go again. I don't know actually what they're going to ask me. I have no idea. And if you know me, you'll know that I'm not an official representative of the farming world. I'm just a normal farmer bloke. The same as probably some of you watching this. I haven't got a flipping team behind me trying to tell me stuff and advisors and stuff. So it's very difficult for me because I haven't got the ability, because I don't know what they're going to ask me, to quote figures and stuff like that. So it was a bit frustrating towards the end of the interview that he brought in some chap who was actually responsible, I think, for that study that actually said that the threshold should be raised to 5 million quid. Now, at this point, I was kind of agreeing with that. And then he sort of went on, listen to that in the interview. He then went on to say, but a certain percentage above 5 million have got assets that they can pay the inheritance tax. And I had no figures to prove anything different, other than I didn't always agree with that. Because basically what he was implying is that there's not just core farming money, they've got other money in other pots which they could spend on the inheritance tax for that farm. and I didn't have a chance to make the point that, which I thought about afterwards, is that that could be true. They could have some properties they're letting out or something, but unless you look at the figures of that farm, you don't know whether that money from that property is perhaps supporting the income on the farm when the chips are down. And as we know, the chips are going down on dairying at the moment because the milk price is plummeting. So, you know, someone who's an accountant and looking at just, or someone doing a study like that, doesn't necessarily know how a farm works with finance. And so I kind of think this is the whole problem with the inheritance tax on farms, is that everyone looks at the asset value, but they don't necessarily understand how that asset value is used to create income or wealth, if you like, for the farmer. Anyway, listen to this. It was off the cuff. I kind of try and hope I do my best every time I do anything on the radio or TV or anything, that I do kind of put the farmer's point of view over and try and do it as best as I can, because I think we're all in it together, aren't we? You know, I'm no better or worse than the guy down the road with 300 acres or the guy down the road with 15. We're all kind of, I really hope and I believe that we're all in it together to try and just struggle on through. I meet plenty of farmers, and we all kind of have the same issues with life. I think time's precious on a farm, and that's probably one thing we haven't got any of. Right. Anyway, this is Nicky Campbell and me. Didn't ever meet Nicky, but he used to be on Radio 1 and presenting Top of the Pops back when I was a kid. And now look at him, he's on a serious show on Radio 5. Right, here we go. Crack on. See you later. Proper farming video back at the weekend. Me and Hazza doing our Yorkshire boarding.
Richard in Titherington, dairy farmer. Ditto. Richard, what's your question or point?
Well, I mean, not so much a question as a point about the budget, in the fact that we, as a dairy farmer, well, all farmers throughout the UK had a massive shock in the last budget when they announced the inheritance tax on farming. And since then, there's been a massive pushback against it. And then there was recently a study or a report that said that they really should look at this again and raise the thresholds that it's set at to, I think the advice was £5 million. And the way that they suggested doing it would actually still bring in, well, they said more money for the exchequer. And as someone who's a small farmer, that's what I would really push for it to happen now. The thresholds would just, basically, Nicky, I don't think the Labour Party understood farming. And I think they looked at us as a massive asset. You know, undeniably, most farms are asset rich, but what they are is cash poor, and that asset is part of the business that actually creates the income and the tax that actually goes to the Chancellor. So by setting the thresholds so low, a very large number of farms that aren't exactly cash rich are going to be affected. We need to have that threshold put higher. At the very least, I would like to say it gone forever, actually, to be honest. I don't believe in inheritance tax at all. But I really think they need to look at it again. Well, I mean, there are obviously probably maybe there's thresholds where someone's got a lot of money. You know, I'm talking multi-millions, but you know, £1 million threshold for anyone. I mean, if you're living in London and you've got a property, you own a property in London, I'm sure a lot of them are going to be worth £1 million without you blinking. And it's very unfortunate if you're trying to support your children and that's where the wealth's going. But from a farming point of view, putting inheritance tax on a business that is actually there to generate money to keep that business going means that it's almost like taxing someone's bicycle that they're cycling to work with. You know, if they've got to pay for their bicycle wheels and they can't afford to pay the bills for their house, then it's the end of their business, if you like, or work. We need to think about the tax threshold being raised, and that's what I would be hoping for in the budget. But, you know, do the Labour Party want to backtrack on what was a silly idea? I don't know, because they've already backtracked once with the winter fuel allowance. I think.
Well, they're talking about some kind of amelioration. There have been whiffs of that in the press, but there's been lots of whiffs of lots of things in the press.
Yeah.
One never quite knows. Dawn, do you want to speak to Richard about this? He says it was ill-advised.
Yes, I think, Richard, we have a lot of sympathy with the farmers. As you say, where it's your home, your business, the lifeblood of the British economy, we want to buy British meat, British produce. It's a huge part of the country.
Is that a moo in the background?
I think that is a cow in the background. So that,
I'm on the farm.
I was going to say we're authentically on the farm here.
Yes.
Agricultural property relief changes, which is what you're talking about, Richard, hugely controversial. That is going to be changed from April next year, 2026. A lot of people shocked about that now it's not 100% tax relief. Aaron and I were talking about this earlier, that basically by increasing that threshold, as you suggest, or looking at the proportion of the farm as your total estate. So where somebody's investing in the farm as a sideline, then maybe they should pay inheritance tax. Where it's a family business and you want to pass it on, you can't sell a field or a herd of cows to pay inheritance tax when someone passes away, and you want to pass it on to the next generation. There, the full exemption probably should apply. So yes, there probably should be a rethink or an adjustment on this.
Although I have to say, when we've done phone-ins on this, Richard, and you won't like it, it's pretty 50-50. It's quite a lot of people coming on and saying, get you and your Land Rovers. You know, we get a lot of that. I'm not endorsing the opinion, but we hear the opinion a lot, you know?
I totally understand that, because I think, again, if you're looking for an outsider, you say, well, you've got 100, 200 acres, you know, you've got plenty of money. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be taxed if you say sell that, you know, because, you know, you decided to cash in your asset. You know, the government, if they say want money for tax, they should have a bit of that. But if you're trying to tax someone that is actually trying to continue that business on, I'm stood here now looking at fields that have been in our family for 200 years. Our family's farmed for 203 years on this site. And I have no intention to cash in my asset. It's never been about the money. It's about the pride of looking after the British countryside and, you know, trying to produce food for the public. And I am so proud of that. And what worries me, okay, is that when I pass, and I'm not just talking about myself, I'm talking about the farmers around the UK. When we pass, the thought is that that's carried on by the next generation. But it's already a very difficult job anyway. I mean, this year we had a massive drought. It cost us a lot of money to buy in feed to keep the business going. If you pass on this asset, which has lots of difficulties, and you put the burden of inheritance tax on top of that as well.
All right.
I don't know whether the next generation want to take it.
Let me bring Arun in, and I know there's a lot of confusion about the amount of land that should be set aside for nature preservation, and I know there's a lot of criticism at the government for changing plans at short notice and for being a bit, your accusation of not fully understanding what farmers have to do. Arun, you wanted to come in here.
Yeah, so I guess briefly just for everyone else's background, because I guess a lot of listeners won't have followed the details of these things. You know, the average person, the typical person, is getting £500,000 tax-free on death, and everything else is taxed. It used to be that for people who owned a private business or who owned a farm, you could have 100% relief, so unlimited amounts that you could pass over. And the government last year announced that from next year, from April 26, that would be reduced to only £1 million on top of the £500,000 everybody gets, another £1 million tax-free. And then a half rate of tax on all of those assets afterwards.
Is a combine harvester an asset?
So a combine harvester, they would be considered an asset. So they would tax all those parts.
Everything would be an asset. Your dairy herd, your cows.
How do you realise the cash on a humbug? How do you?
Yeah, and so I think that the debate has been exactly this: is can farmers find the cash to be able to set aside to pay for this? So the organisation that I run, Syntax, wrote this report that Richard referenced, where he said, look, it is the government's figures are correct in that most estates on passing actually have enough other assets around that they can afford to pay the tax. But there definitely are still many estates, about 70 a year, who won't have the money aside in their estate to put us, basically most of everything they own is the farm. There is other stuff around.
I have to cut in here because you say most estates have got the assets. Well, undoubtedly true. I've got some tractors I could sell. I'm looking at 70 cows in a field. I could sell those to pay the inheritance tax. But then I don't have a tractor to drive around to check the cattle or to do the mowing. I don't have a dairy herd to milk the cows. I don't have an income then. What people are thinking is you can sell your asset. But that's like I said before, refer to the bicycle. Sell your wheels on your bicycle because you raise some money, but then you can't ride your bike. It's very much like that on a farm.
But I think it's an important point. Like, we're saying that most estates are not like yours, in that most estates, if that's what you have, most estates are not like yours. Most of the people who are receiving this relief actually a relatively small share of the stuff they're passing on is a farm like that, is those assets. So we're saying you can't sell that stuff. Part of what we were modelling was we assume you can't sell your combine harvester, you can't sell your dairy herd, you can't sell your tractors, but what other stuff do people have? Now again, I part of the question of whether you should have inheritance tax, but in a world in which we have it, what we said was there are some estates like yours where actually most of everything the person is passing on is a farm, is assets that are part of a farm. So the cows, the land, all of those things. You can't sell those things and still run the farm. But because most of the people currently getting relief actually aren't looking like that, what you could do is say that if less than 60% of the stuff you're passing on is a farm or is a business, you don't need relief because you would never need to sell those assets because you always have 40% of your estate, at least, that is non-farm stuff and non-business stuff. So you could always use that.
I think that's
If you take relief away from those people, you can increase the relief for the people who actually have most of their estate being a farm.
I think I'm going to have to draw a line and move it on. It's a rich
I'd have
topic.
to disagree.
I know.
Right.
Well, I thought you might say that, but listen, Richard, you'll be back, and we'll discuss it again. That's for sure.